They're saying it's good now? Okay, but then when I do this, does it get worse? Okay. Hey, everybody. Woo. Thank you for that smattering of applause.
No smattering.
No, you gotta. I don't want your pity applause. Now I have to earn that one back. So I don't have anything planned, and I've prepared nothing, which is nice. So I was in Vegas yesterday, and we had launched Visual Studio 2019. We launched .NET Core 3.0. But since we're all developers, I thought we would maybe do a little bit of low-level stuff, maybe a little lower level than you're used to, and then work our way up. And since we are all friends here, feel free to interrupt or to say, well, hey, hang on, how does that work? Because it usually makes the talk better. It's silly if I'm just talking at you, because if I'm talking at you, you can just watch YouTube. And if you're here, though, if you have a question, it usually is a better talk because of your questions. Cool? And is anyone here not a .NET person who either came for the food or to learn about .NET? A couple people? So what are you? Are you like Ruby spies or Node people? Erlang, what's your thing?
Java, Go.
Java, Go, cool. Coming. Okay, who else we got? Can we over here? Were you just raising your hand for be silly? Python person? Cool. Cool. COBOL, nice. COBOL, the last remaining COBOL programmer, very, very, very well paid. Excellent. We have COBOL.net now, which is nice. So you've got a path to success. Have you heard the news? Okay, cool. And I'm also going to try a couple other things that I haven't tried before. And are we looking okay on the YouTube? For 12 people right now we got on YouTube? Pretty exciting. 14? Excellent. Who's using .NET Core? Okay. Who's using .NET Full Framework? The people who are doing Full Framework, are you doing websites or are you doing WinForms and WPF? WPF, yes. Yes was a good answer. Websites using C? Okay, cool. I'm going to do the best I can to explain this the best I can, but if I make a mistake, if I say this, if I do something wrong, the only real source of truth is going to be the blogs. So if I get something technically wrong, feel free to check on either the web dev blog or the .NET blog in case I get it wrong. So this is how I think about it, right? So you've got your operating system down here, right? And you've got all of your native APIs. Some of the APIs are low level, like beep. Some of them are higher level, like go and get this file over HTTP and give it to me in a stream. These are all native APIs. I'm going to use an oversimplification, and I'm going to say these are all C APIs, right? These are all like extern C. If you're a Linux person, they'd be like shared objects, and if you're a Windows person, it's just like loading a native DLL and saying do something. It's important when we think about .NET or Go or Ruby or anything that has a runtime that there's an implicit spackling over the top of those native APIs. And that layer of spackle is trying to kind of clean the cracks of the surface area of that underlying API. And I think sometimes some of us learn .NET and we learn Go or Ruby or Node, and we think we're looking at the metal of the computer, but we forget that there's metal underneath that, right? And I think it's a little funny because the JavaScript people believe that JavaScript is the new metal. But you know, old people are reminded that, you know, somebody still got to shift gears in the car, even if it's an automatic shift car. So if we say to .NET, you know, file.open, it feels low level. We get a stream, we get bytes. But ultimately, someone else before you're standing on their shoulders, goes and calls file open at the file system level. So if you say file open C:\foo, works great on Windows, you can run that over on Linux, and it'll fall apart when it hits that backslash, because they do their slashes a different way, right? When you go and say, hey, go and get this HTTP google.com, who did that? This is a great interview question, by the way. I don't like interview questions where you make people do whiteboarding or do a bubble sort or any of that crap. I like interview questions that they don't know the answer to because there is no right answer. A great interview question is, you go to the browser, you type google.com or bing.com, you hit enter, what happens? What happens? And then what happens, it's not a trivia question, because you could also say, well, what do you think happens? Do they say, well, it makes an HTTP call? Well, but how did it know who to call? Well, DNS. Well, and then you can get the real nerds that are like, well, the key presses and the metal of the key touches, and then electrons, and like, and at the quantum level, the state changes in the keyboard. Like, what kind of nerd are you, right? You don't have to know that stuff, right? Because ultimately, you pushed enter and a page appeared. Awesome. And most web developers can get away with just knowing that some bytes came back and I put them in their HTML and they represent a DOM. I talk a little bit about this in a blog post that I did where I juxtaposed the way I learned with the way the younger people learn. And there's no judgment in this. This is just simply a different way of thinking. I, as someone of a certain age, learned that the metal, I learned from the metal up. They made us suffer. And then when we were done suffering, they said, and then they gave us a better language. So they would teach us assembler. And they go, move AX, comma 0, and they go, no, we use C. C. And then we learn C, and they're like, malloc, and allocate your own memory, and free, and then things crash. And they go, C++. Yeah, memory oh no, Java, now we're doing memory management. And they're like, yeah, but remember, a butterfly flaps its wings and someone calls move AX, comma 0. But now you got JavaScript. Those people aren't learning from the metal up. They're learning from the glass of the monitor back. They go into the browser, they hit F12, and they think about what happens there. And low level would be maybe inside the V8 JavaScript virtual machine, or low level might be some cool CSS animation that they did. And that's totally fine. We're basically tunneling through this mountain, and we may or may not meet the same way. And they may never learn about the metal, and I may never learn about the shadow DOM, and that's totally okay. Runtimes spackle over a lot of the complexities of stuff, and when I say file.open, some native library has to get called. Okay? So the .NET framework was a kind of, the .NET CLR, the common language runtime, took this intermediate language and it would go and run it, and ultimately someone would have to call a native API. And we've long since forgotten that that's the case. And this is a case for anything, whether it's Go or whether it's Java or whatever, you are at the mercy of the native API that's underneath. You could write some Go, and it could call a native Windows API, and then you could move it over to Linux, and it would crash at runtime. And that's totally fine, and it's neither good nor bad, it's just computer science. Now, what if we went out to the command line, and I don't know what I'm doing. There we go. Make directory, PADNUG. Make dir console app is nice. Okay. And if I said .NET new console, and I'll go .NET build. I'm using a preview version, so if this doesn't work, I'll have to go and try it with a version that's not a preview. This is literally a version of .NET that came out yesterday, so I'm not super up to date on like how the kids are doing things today. So that's pretty fast. I'm going to go back up, and I'm going to try something else. I'm going to remove that folder. I don't know how to do it in PowerShell. Make directory, console is nice. On my .NET machine, I can say list SDKs and see which ones are on my machine. I'm going to pick one that I know how to use. And I'm going to say .NET new global JSON. And I'm going to open it in God's editor. It's Notepad. This is actually Notepad 2, which, as you all know, is one better than Notepad. And when I say .NET version, you see how it says version 2.2. But if I go up a directory and I say version, it's 3.0. So I've pinned that folder to a specific version. That way, it works the way I expect things to work. And I'm going to say .NET New Console. And there's my console. Let's look at it real quick. Cool. Right? Pretty controversial. And then let's go and say .NET Run 1, 1000, 2, 1000, 3, 1004. And then the Go person is like, this sucks, but I'm sitting in the middle and I can't get out. Microsoft with a $sign, right? Go can do that in milliseconds. What's going on here is that in the bin folder, let me go and push D current directory and go down to bin, and then debug, and then a folder. There's a DLL there, 4K DLL that says console is nice. If I say .NET console is nice, one's, go fast. Why did .NET Run go slowly? Because .NET Run implies build. .NET Run is an SDK or a software development kit thing. It has a lot of baggage along with it. It's not what you do at runtime. At runtime, you go .NET exec or .NET this thing. Now, we see how small it is. It's about 4K. Does it have everything that it needs to do the stuff that it needs to do? Probably not. There's native stuff that needs to come along for the ride. There's also the .NET framework itself. Now, here's an interesting question. Let's go and run ildasm, which is the IL disassembler. Now, I'm doing this because my dad told me that you need to learn how to drive a stick shift, because one day someone will get in an accident and there'll only be a stick shift available and you won't know how to drive them and they're going to die. So there's the main, and there's the code. Now, since none of us know what any of that means, I'll just lie, and you'll go, okay, that's what that means. So line 0, NOP. No idea what that is. I know what it is, actually. That's a test to see which amongst us is a pedant who feels...
Well, actually, Mr. Hanselman, that is in fact a no operation or a null operation, no op.
I'm just giving you a hard time. Ludster. No idea what that is. Really? Never would have guessed that one. So load string, right, puts the string there in preparation of a call to something on line 6 there, on line 006. And look, it says, hey, in this library, in this namespace, there's going to be a thing called write line, and then we'll go and bail out. Is there anything there that says Windows or Linux? Is there anything there that's low level? It's just simply a call to a shared library. One of the cool things about .NET over like a JavaScript is that it's got a larger base class library. It comes with a lot of stuff out of the box. If you want to pad a string to the left on Node, you got to go and bring in a whole library to do that. That was a small pad left joke. If you don't know what that joke meant, go and Google for Node pad left and learn about the scandal around them. Cool. Again, non-denominational. I love you all, but you gotta be able to tease people about NPM. Cool. So that goes and says call write line. Now, what if I went and opened up a totally different window? And this one, Okay, there's my file again. What if I said mono? Mono. Console is nice. Okay, so I made this thing with .NET Core, which is open source, and I just ran it with mono. Right? What is mono? Mono is a clean room re-implementation of .NET. Right? It's a .NET that somebody built from scratch without peeking. This is important. They did it without peeking. Clean room, didn't peek. Re-implementation, wrote it again from scratch. of .NET, which is really super interesting because they didn't want to go afoul of patents and stuff because Microsoft was still evil, right, as early as last week. So what this does, though, is it takes that intermediate language. We had C#, we compiled it to an intermediate language, and then we ran that intermediate language with Mono. Does Mono know or care that that was ran on .NET Core? No. It just took that intermediate language and ultimately made the native call to write out to the console. So that's kind of interesting. That means that there's multiple .NETs. If you're a Java person, there's a half dozen Javas. They understand that there's multiple Java runtimes. If you are a Node person, if you are doing Java, there's choice of runtime, there's choice of application server, there's lots of choice. .NET people aren't usually used to there being the Windows .NET. And it's in C:\Windows /scary /version number / don't touch here, right? Run something, it runs on that. But I've just proven that I can run something on 2 different .NETs. And there's in fact 3 on my machine. There's Mono, there's .NET Framework, the Windows one, and then there's .NET Core. So that's kind of cool and interesting, yeah? And it only cares about IL. So what if I went back up here? So we've got console is nice. Let's make another, let's go back out of here. Okay, we have a console app, right? Let's make a standard library, class lib. Okay. Class 1. For some reason, I'm trying out this new Windows console because nerds like transparency. And it's kind of somewhat transparent. But whenever I run something, it ends up putting things in the behind there. All right, let's useful class. You need to remember these because I'm going to forget the namespace and I'm going to forget the class because I don't have any stack. I'm only a heap memory person. So you're my stack. I will manage the heap. Public static string add stuff int x int y. We'll make this a long, actually. No, we'll add stuff. Add stuff is lame. Greeting, string. What's up? What's up? Okay, useful utility. All right. PADNUG useful class greeting. What are you freaking out about? Oh, I'm in the wrong folder. Oh, that was lame. So you see what I did here? And none of you stopped me. So thanks for that help. That was great. You were thinking it, but you were like, he probably knows what he's doing. No. No idea. But thank you for your help, giant group of programmers. They were like, yeah, I'm not going to help him. We'll let him twist. Beep. Better? You guys are so mean. Probably because I called that one guy a pedant before, and now he's like, well, forget you, Hanselman. I'm not helping you out of that compiler error. You're gonna pay, friend. Let's go back. Oh, remember that that global JSON that manages things? I'm going to move that up because I want to make sure that it applies to this location down, right? I want everything to work that way. Should be fine, but we'll go back into useful library. Build our useful library. Cool. Now, can I have the console call it? .NET add reference. I think is add preference, add reference, or add project? Anyone remember? Let's say reference. .NET useful library. That look right? Okay. I may have to get rid of this That DOS box isn't letting me jump things up. So that's the Visual Studio equivalent of right-click, add, project. Right, I just did it at the command line. It's nice to know that you can, do 4 on the floor if you need to and then switch to an automatic at some point. But it literally did the exact same thing. But it's just nice to know, right? Okay. So we'll probably graduate now because this is officially frustrating watching me do things at the command line. So I'm going to type code. And we'll go up into here. Okay. And let's call that from here. Okay, namespace. What? PADNUG dot useful class. You all suck. Useless people. There's no IntelliSense. It's all gone to hell. What's happening? Nobody knows what's happening. PADNUG dot useful class. So just using PADNUG. Okay. This mob programming is working out really, really well, I gotta say. Okay. Doot. Doot. Does anyone else do that when they're alone? No? Am I the only one that's like beep boop bop boo boop boo? No? I think that's normal. It's okay to do that. If you're what? If you're R2D2? If you're awesome. Okay, why is that doing that? I know why. It's open over here. Yeah. Okay. Okay, yay. So that library that we did, useful library, is a net standard library, right? And that's a standard that we agree upon that has all of these things available to us. It's got console.writeline, it's got this, that. It doesn't dictate the implementation, though. So I can run this on a watch, and it's up to the watch to decide what console means in that context, right? And it's also up to that platform to throw a not implemented exception if it doesn't find that on that platform as well, okay? I can run it on Mono, I can run it on .NET Framework, I can run it and do whatever I want. Now, let's try this.
So should we think of it as an interface?
You should absolutely think of it as an interface. It's a version interface with a ton of stuff. So the idea being that in the old days, last year, you would, you'd learn C#, you'd learn .NET, you'd have your job, everything would be great, and then your boss would be like, hey, write an Android app. And you'd be like, yeah. And then you go to Android, and you have to learn a whole bunch of new APIs. And be like, what? That sucks. So instead, you just learn the .NET standard, and it works everywhere, meaning that you can write on a Raspberry Pi, in a Docker container, on a watch, wherever. That's the idea. That's why the .NET standard exists. Okay? Good question. Thank you for that. So what if I went .NET New Web? Did I screw it up again? You guys suck. Yeah, you did tell me. Just now. Doot, 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 doot. Doot, doot. Doot, doot, doot. All right, cool. Go down into You Suck. Make sure it works. 5,000. Boop. Okay. Oh, you saw that work, right? I mean, I don't want to waste your time. Go. Okay. Cool. That's interesting. It's a website. Now, did you? Doop. That's wrong. That's right. Okay. Program. Make a web server. Start up. Write out hello world. Okay, what was it called? No, it wasn't called You Suck. Useful library.greeting. Okay. You guys are horrible. Just awful. Zing, PADNUG. Just checking. I was testing you. I was testing you. You knew that? Useful class? All right. Glad I don't have to do this for my job or anything. Okay, why is that going to fail? Okay, you're all learning very well, or you are professional developers, one of the two. Okay, ba-ba-ba. You know, I was thinking about making like a macro or something that played music when you were compiling. It's just ba-ba-da-da. You know, it's just like kind of like a Muzak for developers, but only during the compilation period. Yeah. You think I could maybe make that happen? Have you seen this? This is great. This is a really good thing you should give to your. Go put this in your work Slack. This is just a line of code, and you just go put it in the Slack and say, "Hey, everybody! Oh my goodness, check this really cool macro out." And that's just like a really killer opportunity to explain to them why you shouldn't arbitrarily run code that someone put on the internet. Yeah, let's check that out. Okay, so that worked, but that's not interesting. What have I proven there? I've just proven that .NET Standard is portable. Okay.
Scott, got to pull back way in time. Remember the old MFC and the charts with the class library and everything?
Okay.
Do they have such a thing for .NET?
Charts? We do have charts.
Because I need a visual chart to see how the relationships and the calls. There's so many.
You want a dependency tree of all the libraries?
Something like that.
Sure. ndepend. ndepend.com. It'll do dependency trees and everything, and it'll show you like whether there's circular dependencies or whatever kind of thing. It'll do the transitive closure over the dependencies if you want to see that. Okay? And if you want like actual charts, like D3JS is a good chart system. Okay, cool. Oh yeah, so that doesn't prove anything, but it's kind of interesting. What if we did this though? Okay, that didn't work because I don't have it installed. Blazor. Okay, so Blazor brings up an interesting question. I'm just going to go and say, add this new template to my instance of .NET, and that allows me to .NET new other stuff. You can make your own templates. They're really great. There's a whole world of these things. Now, you're probably familiar with WebAssembly, right? Okay, a little bit. So remember how we said JavaScript is the new metal? And we all laughed. We were so young. What if you could have a constrained version of JavaScript that was just a minimal number of calls? You call it like asm.js, and it would be like assembly language expressed in terms of JavaScript. And then you would transpile things, C, C++, whatever makes you happy, into this constrained JavaScript. Then you would teach your browser, don't care about all of JavaScript, just care about the little bits. It's like RISC, R-I-S-C, the reduced instruction set for JavaScript. And then you would optimize it to do it really, really fast. Okay, that would be interesting. Then what if that was such a popular idea that you turned it into WebAssembly, formalized it, made it a standard, and then instead of pushing strings around, it was a binary format to express assembly language in the context of a non-architecture specific world. Assembly language usually understands the underlying processor. It usually says, this is x86 assembler, this is 6502 assembler for the Super Nintendo or whatever, right? I'm talking about WebAssembly, okay? Then you could transpile anything into WebAssembly. That'd be interesting. Well, that became a thing. That's an actual thing in the world right now. And I was talking about this with a bunch of people back in 2011, where I said JavaScript is the assembly language for the web. So 7 years ago, I was like, yeah, JavaScript's become the new assembler. And everyone was like, you're insane. So then I went to the people who invented JavaScript, and they were like, yeah, that's a fair take. Cool. And then WebAssembly became a thing. And then people can do stuff like this. So this is a Unity application compiled into WebAssembly. Unity, of course, lets you play video games and stuff. You've probably seen that logo. It's all C#. That's me in blue, kicking butt. Losing against a non-moving tank. Which is fine. I don't have any kind of ego about that. All right. I think I've made my point. So there's a bunch of different .NETs, right? There's the full framework one that runs on Windows that's been around for 17, 18 years. There's .NET Core, which is a new, entirely open source, all the way down to the bottom version of .NET. And then there's Mono. Mono was a clean room re-implementation by a bunch of people who made and loved Linux. And then they turned into Xamarin that then Microsoft bought. Mono was created arguably as a defensive maneuver. But then Microsoft did a patent promise and did all this open source stuff. And now the Mono team can look at our source because it is appropriately licensed. And then we can go and do kind of a Venn diagram of what are the cool things that .NET Core does and what are the cool things that Mono does. And then this new standard allows us to do interesting stuff. Now, .NET Core is built and compiles using Visual Studio and some of the Visual Studio specific things about C and C++. It's not something that's super easy yet to build cleanly. If you want to just go git, clone, configure, and make. But Mono is like legendarily well known for being clean and easy to compile. So what if we compiled Mono and the Mono runtime, which we have just seen as a very competent way to run .NET code, into WebAssembly, and then ran .NET in the browser? Okay? So then what if I went and said, .NET add reference useful library to my Blazor application. And then went over here and said, okay, what is it? PADNUG, thank you. At least you'll remember the name of the place we're at. What was it? Greeting? Useful class. We sure? Useful class dot greeting. Capital? Lowercase? Okay. I don't remember. Okay. I need a what? Oh, God. Oh, my God. Oh. The formal parameter of SUP. It's always nice when, like, you find little things like that. There used to be a message in .NET when you generated code, and it was like, this code was generated by a tool. I am personally feeling attacked by that. It's totally inappropriate. I'm not a tool. Okay. So here you might say, okay, well, that's just another web application. That is neither interesting nor whatever. But we press F12, the new metal. By the way, when you press F12, did you know this? I just try to give at least one useful tip, because all of you are questioning why you came tonight. Did you know that when you have F12 open and you right-click on the reload button, you get those extra options? Oh, well, forget you guys. I'll try harder later. Look at that. What's going on there? So that is the mono.NET runtime compiled into WebAssembly. Did we compile useful class into WebAssembly? No. Where's useful class? Where is it? There it is. You guys know who Z is? What kind of person? It could have been any of us. Think about that. The first 2 bytes of every executable or DLL on the planet, it's got this dude's initials. He just made it up. He's just like, I'm going to put my initials in there. Forget y'all. I wonder if he's alive. We should call him. Yep, he's around. Is he still at work at Microsoft? Oh, he's at Harvard? Where is he now? I got to call this guy and find out what's up. Because he actually designed it. So when you see these things in your hex editor, it's dude. Currently, he's a PhD student. Awesome. And a PhD student. You think he's a technical advisor to a PhD student? Could be. I don't know. It's Wikipedia, right? It's all true. So then people say, well, gosh, that's a lot of work just to do that. Why would you do such a stupid thing? You know, that could be like a megabyte or 2, right? It's a lot of space. Mono is kind of a big thing to be shipping around. How big is this thing, right? It's about 2 megs, which is about 1/10 of the size of the PNG on your company's brochureware website. Or 1/100th of the weight of the homepage of theverge.com. Yeah, it hurts because it's true. Seriously, like a 26-page homepage. It's completely ridiculous.
Why would that be no cache? Just out of curiosity, wouldn't you want to cache that?
Not in development.
Oh, okay, true.
Yeah. Great questions. Why is that not no cache, right? Another question would be, notice it's in the _bin folder, right? So if you wanted to make this not a big deal, you would stick it on a CDN, a content delivery network. You would put excessive caching on it, aggressive caching, and you would treat it like any other thing that you were going to go and use. That's really interesting. So then we could go and do something like fetch some data. See, if I go, see there's the page loads and then the data loads. I'll do that again. Okay, let's look at what that code looks like. If the weather forecast on line 8 right there, table, for each over some stuff, and then some C#. Now, hey, Angular's great, Vue.js is great, knock yourself out. But it's always nice to have options. What if you had 15 years worth of very well-tested, super thoughtful, and interesting .NET code, and you wanted to move it to the web? That would be a thing. What if you had a big company with a lot of .NET developers, and you don't know anything about JavaScript, but you'd like to move to the web? That could be a thing. Lot of options. Here's the interesting thing about it, and why it's not Silverlight or Flash or Java in the browser. Because it's open source all the way down. Because it's built on a standard, built on WebAssembly. So there's a lot of interesting possibilities to be able to do something like that. And the interesting thing is that makes the browser now a .NET standard target. So then I could have code reuse 80, 90% and start doing some really interesting stuff. Now that's pretty basic. I think there is a Blazor Airlines demo that is a lot more significant. Right here, Flight Finder. Let's go and get that. Probably shouldn't have got the whole thing, but still. Come on, I can't be the only one that does that. This probably won't work. All right, load up Visual Studio. There you go. See if this builds. Cross my fingers. While this is happening, we'll see what they're doing. This is like a flight thing. So we got like a in-memory database of airports, right? Okay. Did I have Blazor on this thing? Let's do this real quick. It'll be worth it. Trust me. Okay. I've got that installed. Update. Cool. Visual Studio. Oh no! No! It's the circle of patience. Go close, 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 close. Maybe it won't notice. Waiting, installing. There you go. It goes faster the closer you get. It's gray on gray, so you got to look really close. Dun, dun, dun. You ever do this? You ever do that? Because I want to know if it moves 1 pixel. Otherwise, I got to come back later. Okay. Probably close that down. It's not Notepad's fault, but I'll probably close you too, Notepad. I don't know what you're for. I'm going to accidentally run Skyrim here in a second if I'm not. There it goes. There's just 50%. Apparently, it didn't need to go fully to 100%. Okay. This is all experimental, by the way, so that's why you can have low expectations.
Have you installed the Blazor extension in 19, not 17?
I don't think so. You think so?
I thought so.
I don't think so. We'll know in a minute. And you will not win a Surface Go if you are right. All right, build started. Ready? Okay. Something's happening over here. I don't know if it's falling in a hole or is it a wood chipper? What's happening there? It's probably a wood chipper. It built, so that means we can put it directly into production without testing. Yeah, it looked like it worked to me, right? Right-click, publish. Yeah. Look at that. Cool. You're like, wow, it actually worked. Hanselman did not a complete idiot. So think about how you would write an app like this, right? You know, Angular this or whatever flavor, lawn chair JS, whatever you all use, noun JS that you use. And then go and explore the code for this because it's actually quite clever. We've got like our data transfer objects, right? These are just things we agree upon, like airports look like this, and flight segments look like that. That's not rocket science. Okay. And then let's look at something like an airport controller, right? Go and get the stuff from the airport. Right now it's doing sample data, but you can imagine that calling a JSON backend. That's not complicated. flight search controller. Now what this does is simulates a back-end server. So here we are going and making random flight segments and then making sure that they link up. Again, simulating a database. Okay, and then check this out. Here is an airport list, okay? So you've got dependency injection, like on line 1 there. Same dependency injection that you're used to in .NET. You got a for loop. We all know what for loops do. For loops makes a list of options. And then it's got some functions there to go and get some JSON from the back end. So that is the description of an airport's list. It's a data list, okay? Then if we look at something like search results, some basic questions. If itinerary is null, show this. Otherwise, spin through the itineraries. And then look at these purple bits. Look at that. See, that's not HTML, right? That's purple. It says search result flight segment. So what does search result flight segment look like? Well, it looks like that. So it's the controls that you're used to. It's reusable. This is a really, really easy way to teach like making a SPA or a single page application without knowing any JavaScript. It's still an experiment, but you should check it out. We are shipping the server-side part in ASP.NET, and we're talking about doing the client-side part, which is all of the Blazor stuff. So it's pretty cool. This is not a replacement for MVC or web APIs or whatever. It's an augmentation. It's another way to think about stuff. And what's cool about it is it's all standard. It's all in the browser. It's all real. Quite a clever thing. Okay? What happens if you click F12? You'll be served legal papers. No one is allowed to do that. We're Microsoft. What's wrong with you? Let's find out. I don't know. You want to see like on the wire? Oh, yeah. Oh, you mean like, you want to see like view source? Yeah, let's do that. That's a good idea. Thank you. Yeah, it is HTML. That's literally it. So you've got like Bootstrap for your color, right? We're not doing XAML. It's not making Windows buttons. This is HTML. It loads Blazor WebAssembly, and it outputs these things. Now, looking at view source isn't interesting. What's interesting is right-click, inspect, and look at the DOM itself. So there's the input with the airports. A couple of divs for the rows, right? There's your CSS that we saw at the beginning. Blazor is making that div. Here's the selection area, right? It's regular old HTML. There's the little airport icon dealy. So I can double click inside that. See? It's just that .NET is running in WebAssembly, and WebAssembly is JavaScript, and it can talk to the DOM and change stuff. Isn't that cool? So it's kind of the best of both worlds if you are a fan of the .NET. Okay.
What's the performance like between running similar in WebAssembly versus coding it in, say, React or Angular?
I don't know versus React, but you have to think about the overhead of a runtime within a runtime. It's a little bit of an inception thing there. Fortunately, it's not orders of magnitude. It's like basically 2x slower. Right? So you're getting a basically half speed. But remember, this is already at milliseconds speed. It's if you're smart about how you paint and do your DOM, that's not your problem. Your problem is your network calls. Right? We haven't done things like infinite scrolling yet, but a person to ask would be like Steve Sanderson, who is the lead dev on this, and he can tell you from a perf perspective.
With running the Unity framework, and I was just curious whether
Yeah, WebAssembly is fast. It's not that WebAssembly isn't fast, it's that we are literally running a runtime on top of a runtime.
Sure.
Right, so there is overhead for that. But I always go back to the PNG example of like, yeah, there's overhead of getting it across the wire, but just like jQuery, once everyone's cached it, it's pretty much handled, and we could all have a CDN with all of our Blazor runtime stuff. I don't think you're going to go and make the homepage a bing.com in Blazor. I think you are going to go and take a WinForms app or a WPF app with a lot of well-factored view models and back end.
or a Silverlight app.
or a Silverlight app and do the front end again, right? I mean, you can take legacy code and move it forward. Here's another interesting example. So my blog runs .NET 2. I just upgraded to .NET 4. It is a 10-year-old blog, runs on a virtual machine, and it runs web forms. And everyone's like, why don't you upgrade it? I was like, it works fine. Works totally fine. I'm not really worried about it. It does 1 million+ page views a month, gets /dotted or whatever, hacker newsed on the regular, doesn't go over unless the disk fills up. So I don't have any problem with this. But this gentleman named Mark Downey, buddy of mine, Papa String, decided to go and upgrade DOSBlog to .NET Core. Except DOSBlog is written in web forms. So that would be a problem, right? Well, it's about responsibilities. The runtime, the talking to the database part, has nothing to do with the UI. So he ported that to .NET Standard. The front end, he just wrote a light front end using MVC. So about 75 to 80% of the code was entirely portable. Then he used modern web technologies and stuff, and I can then take my blog, and I'm looking forward to upgrading it to his stuff. Database, which is a bunch of XML files into a folder, running it all on, and I can run DOSBlog now in a Docker container on Linux. So I can go out to the command line again and show you something interesting. I've got my podcast. This is my podcast site. This is my podcast. Does anyone listen to my podcast? No? Not very nice people. I've got a podcast. I've done over 670 episodes. So if you haven't heard, please do listen to the show. You have a lot to catch up on. I've had a lot of really cool people talking about a lot of really cool stuff. This is just like the last 100 episodes. 30-minute long show. This website is written in ASP.NET Core 2.0. All these lovely people, and I'm only 200 episodes in. Okay? I can go out and say .NET Run here on my website. I'll run it locally here. And it's factored enough away that the database part and the front end part are completely separate. And I've got it down kind of to a science. This would be running locally, so that's on port 5000. So that would be the website on the right and there you go. And the debug on the left, right? But then, let's see if this works. I haven't done this in a while, it might not work. I could go Docker run. Actually, this might not work because it's been a while since I've updated the Docker file. Let's find out. Remind me in Docker how to tell what port it's on. Docker ps-a. 8000. Thanks for your help. Okay. Yeah. So there's the same thing running on Linux and Docker. Now, if I had my Raspberry Pi with me, my little $30 thing, I can run it on Raspberry Pi now. So think about that as someone who's been doing .NET for 15 years. Suddenly, I just became a Linux developer who can run in containers, do stuff in containers. That's cool. So then I went and wrote some tests. So I'm going to go and say .NET test. You saw me going .NET run. I'm going to say .NET test. And then, did my battery just die? Batteries, am I still on? Oh, it's the other mic. This mic. This mic died, dude. Oh, that's my insulin pump. This mic died. Dead battery. It literally says dead battery with an exclamation point. These are rechargeables. That's the problem. These are Amazon Basics. I thought we had sponsors, PADNUG. basic,
That
basic,
is Intel's property right there.
Basic ass batteries.
double A.
That way I got it.
Do you literally have batteries with you? Demola for the win, man. Here's some basic batteries, man. You charge those up, you'll be bright as rain.
In your mouse, dude.
You take them out of your mouse? Oh my God.
Sacrifice for
Look
the
at
greater
you,
good.
man. Here, have some basic batteries.
I think he deserves a prize.
I think he deserves yeah, we need to give him a Surface for giving me batteries. Batteries that only have one notch on the battery meter. That's why you didn't want them. It's your old batteries, dude. All right, thank you, sir. So I'm going to say test. Check this out. This is going to go and run the unit tests, starting test execution. Now look at this. That's Selenium. That's Chrome on a string. It says Chrome is being controlled by automated test software. Now it's going to load it, and it's basically I'm making web service calls to a local server that then talks to the browser. It's like you put a web API in front of the browser. It's called a web driver. So I'm actually pushing buttons and clicking on stuff and testing things. And I've got 21 passed, 22 failed. And then let's take a look. Expected Hanselman is podcast by Hanselman, but it got what? Hanselman is podcast and an enter by Hanselman. So then I could go and check that because my website has changed, and I would go and either update the test or I'd check to make my markdown is possible. I can then, if I want, run the same tests inside the Docker container. So now it's going and it's getting the layers that it needs. Because I know that it runs on Windows, now we'll go and see if it runs in Docker. Isn't that cool? While that's happening, then I can go up to here, not here, here, here. This is Azure DevOps to pipelines. It's free for open source projects. And I can see my build. So every time I check into GitHub, it went and did a complete build. You can see it got .NET Core, published the artifact. And I can go and click on any one of those and see like what it said at the time. I can see the log. Let me see if NuGet restore. One of them will have logs. There you go. You can see exactly what's going on. And I can do that, of course, with any language and anything. And again, free for open source projects, which is really cool. So I'm really cheap. I like doing these things as cheaply as possible. Yeah, that's going to take forever because Docker. But I'll come back to that. OK. So now let's pop all the way back off the stack to the beginning. We've got Mono, and we've got .NET Core, and we've got Mono, and we've got other .NETs. You have as many like implementations of .NET as you want. I've been showing you .NET Core 2.2, but when I asked everyone at the beginning, are you a WPF person or a WinForms person? WinForms is, what, 18 years old? It's old, right? And sometimes WinForms people say, man, it's still really, really convenient and super useful, but we're not respected, like as a group. No, but seriously, but what if Microsoft unified these frameworks, made all the controls available anywhere? So a WinForms developer could use a Windows 10 map control or an ink control or Canvas or whatever. All the stuff would be the same. The list boxes, everything would be the same across all three of them. So yesterday when I was in, or day before yesterday when I was in Vegas, we open sourced WinForms. We open sourced WPF, and we open sourced the Windows XAML controls that power UWP. Isn't that cool? So then, what if we could do something like this? That has to build.
3.0 is still in beta, right?
It's preview 1 as of yesterday. WPF stands for Windows Presentation Foundation, and it still runs only on Windows. Why? Because when it ultimately gets down to the metal, it's going to call that C API or that whatever that has to be there, like create window and things like that. Low-level Windowsy stuff. But what if we swapped out the brain? What if your app is up here and Windows is down here, and we just said, well, there's the .NET framework, the full framework, 4.x or whatever, and now .NET Core is an option. So why would that be interesting? Well, that would be interesting for a couple of reasons. .NET Build. Let's go find Fancy Pants. Those warnings are that I'm using, oh, it's because it's open. Using a preview. Did it work? Okay, let's go to bin, debug. What's that? Yeah, it's in use because it was running. Should be okay now. Okay, cool. So that's the app. I'm not sure if this is, oops, I'm not sure if this is up to date yet. I want to say Win10 x64. This might not be ready yet. This is the preview that came out yesterday. Cool. So that is 93 megs, not 2 gigs. And that's every single thing that that application would need to run. So then I could copy deploy it to another Windows machine without installing .NET, and it would just work. Right now, you have a WinForms or WPF application. You got, well, this machine's got .NET's 4.6.1, and that one's got 4.8. Here you would have your own private one. And then now, if someone upgrades .NET on the machine, you might have fear that it's going to break existing apps. What if the app could just work side by side? The .NET framework 4.8 is going to probably be there for a while. It's not going anywhere. It'll be supported forever. Visual Basic 6 still runs on Windows just fine. VisiCalc runs on x86 versions of Windows. Microsoft doesn't really get respect for their backwards compatibility. I've still got a Mac Mini that's stuck on Snow Leopard because Apple just said, no. They couldn't move that one forward. They just decided to abandon it. But, you know, Microsoft's pretty good on back compat. What the options here are is now I can use C#8, all the new features, all the new innovations going to be in .NET Core. So we're going to be swapping things out so that you can go and take any existing application, WinForms, WPF, or whatever, and then run it on .NET Core 3.0. Ideally, the user would never know. One sec. Here is an existing app called the NuGet Package Explorer that's actually a store app. So this actually comes out of the store. I installed it from the store. It looks at NuGet packages. And I can right-click and uninstall it. Right, it is a store app, rate and review and everything. I can go over here in the Process Explorer and look at what's inside that application. And there's the core CLR. And where is it? It's down in the packaging stuff. So I can always rest assured that that application is going to work. So then you think of your great applications that you like, your Paint.nets and those different kinds of .NET applications. Baby Smash, available at babysmash.com if you have small children. It's a great game. I'm going to port that over to .NET Core, and then all my support issues are going to go away when it comes to different versions of different stuff. That's pretty cool. Now, it doesn't mean WPF and WinForms are going to work on Linux because the underlying stuff isn't there. But there are certainly open source options like Avalonia, and there's an app called We, and there's Platform Uno that are all open source implementations of cross-platform. So like cross-platform UIs exist. It's just not something that the WPF team's going to work on. All right, this gentleman had a question first. Yes, sir.
So that makes versioning compatibility really easy and really cool.
Yes, sir.
But how is Microsoft going to issue
Great question. So the gentleman is saying that it makes compatibility really nice, but how do you do security patches? As with all things where an assembly is loaded, including in .NET Core right now, if there is a DLL or a file that is blocked, we can detect it and we can redirect it. So if there's some 0 day, we'll patch it. We can patch that by bringing something down and storing it in the GAC, the global assembly cache somewhere, and basically say that is a known bad actor. A known bad NuGet package will block it, and then we'll make sure that it gets fixed.
So so then our developers' apps that run on core just going to randomly stop working?
Why would they stop working? They would be redirected to a version of that DLL that didn't have the security problem.
Okay.
Right, so like if something was found in JSON.NET or whatever, it's like it's all open source, but basically you could go, like for example, right now I can go, imagine this is a tool that I use to tell me whether or not my apps are out of date. Let's go to I'm going to go .NET outdated. And this is going to look at my project and packages. Imagine a security version of this. This is looking at the dependencies of my app. And then it's going to say, okay, a new version of this thing is out. I'm speculating here, but like imagine if GitHub, which now does this for Node, if anyone's a Node developer and you have a GitHub, you'll visit your repository and the administrator of the repository will see you are using a known, a library that has vulnerabilities. There are NuGet and .NET vulnerability scanners, and when our team sees that something is a major problem, we can handle that remotely. So. Another thing to think about is how many versions of Chromium do you have on your machine from Electron apps? Do you think about if those are patched? We're all running Chrome 99 or whatever the latest version is, but you might have a Chromium application that you downloaded that's running Chrome 70, 20, 30, 40 behind. Who's patching that? Right? Same kind of problem. I would just argue that Microsoft's going to be a little more, well, since we have control of Windows Update, we're going to be a little more aggressive than the Chromium stuff is, which is not aggressive at all. It's simply out there and vulnerable.
Okay.
Good question.
My concern was just that you're putting the responsibility for patching on the developers rather than...
I would say we are putting the functionality patching on the developer, but not the security patching. Okay. Yeah. I don't think that's something that, I think there's a half dozen times in years that that's ever happened. But yeah, the person to ask would be Barry Dorans on Twitter. I'm only speaking to the level at which I know and understand it. But I can, Blowdart, Blowdart is the gentleman's name on Twitter, who would know exactly what our plans are. Cool. Yeah.
For the .NET Core 3 with that WPF app, if you built it with -R ARM32, could you run it on one of the new Windows on ARM laptops not in emulation mode? Is there?
I don't know. I'd have to ask.
Okay.
I'd have to ask. Yeah, there is Windows on ARM coming, and I would assume it would work if the underlying, APIs are there. If it's, it's not about the processor, it's about the P invokes, the platform invokes that happen.
And the underlying Windows stuff was all, I guess, compiled.
Well, I don't know. UWP apps work on ARM. I don't see any reason why not. But Mary McGraw is who owns WinForms, and I can ask her. She owns the thing that we just showed you. Cool. So that's kind of interesting, yeah? Yeah. All right, cool. What else can I show you? How long have I talked so far? 50? 50? Yeah. What do you, over an hour? Okay. I'm trying to think if I forgot anything. Yeah, so that's kind of stuff that's going on that we're working on. Is there anything else I've missed or I should go back and go over?
DLL versioning for like when you have two different projects referencing separate versions. MutanSoft 9? And then how do you have any special way of resolving that same problem?
Yeah, I mean, so it's, you know, it's assembly binding. Assembly binding problems and versioning is in every language has that problem. If if project talks to A and A talks to old version of the JSON thing and project B talks to the new one, one of them is going to win, probably whichever one gets loaded first. Don't do that. To the specific point that you used, JSON.NET, which is an interesting one, it's worth pointing out that we're doing something about that. JSON.NET is the JSON stuff, that is the JavaScript stuff that is inside of .NET, and it's written by a dude. It's written by a guy. And that was fine when it was written, but it's no longer fine. Because if he gets hit by a bus, then what happens, right? So he works for Microsoft now. He got hired. So what we're going to do is he's working on not newtonsoft.json, but system.text.json. So this would mean that .NET would actually have JSON reading built in, which is something it should have had for a while. It's going to start with a reader, and then he's going to build it up to the top. So you'd think, well, that's stupid. Why would we do that? We've relied on it. JSON.NET's the bomb. Why don't we just include it? Well, this is from him, the actual guy, right? The problem is it's 10-year-old code, and it works on everything from Windows phones to Silverlight to Mono to et cetera. It's got a lot of cruft, and it's doing all of that using what are called portable class libraries and different techniques. He's going to upgrade it using modern techniques. Recently, there's a thing called span of T, which is a new way for us to manage memory, and everything's being rebuilt. And that's one of the things that's causing .NET to be up to 10x faster than Node right now because of the way span of T works. JSON.NET can't use that new speed. So we're going to have our own built-in JSON APIs. That way you would not get into a situation where you would be using one version and another version. You would have one from Microsoft, and the best one would win, as opposed to you having to figure it out on your own. And on the perf thing, I'm not trying to disrespect my Node friends, but we are having a lot of fun as a community playing around in the web framework benchmarks. This is at the Tech Empower benchmarks. This is an interesting one. There's ASP.NET Core right there, number 11. What do you notice about the number that they're all encroaching upon? It's all 7 million requests per second. Okay, let's go look for Node. Not trying to disrespect them. I'm just trying to point out that these are different technologies, right? I mean, the .NET framework is a 15-year-old, mature, statically typed runtime with 64-bit support. It's highly tuned. It's a big deal, right? Node is still developing that maturity, and it still doesn't have the kind of multi-threading that we have. But they're going to start moving their way up. The ones that are up at the top here are largely academic or written in C++. Those numbers are approaching 7 million requests per second because that's the max. Like speed of light is now the factor that is slowing us down. We've filled up the pipeline. This is 10 gigabits networks. So now we need a bigger pipe. We're going to have to move this to a 100 gigabit network in order to get any faster than 7 million. So while we're 11th, it's like, plus or minus 0.5% on the perf side. So if perf is not our problem right now, if that makes sense, which is kind of an interesting thing to see. Other questions? Otherwise, I can show you C# 8 stuff. Is this useful? Tech Empower benchmark. Now, there's different Tech EM Power, and there's varying levels of it. And I want to make sure that you're clear that micro benchmarks, as a general rule, are silly and academic, but they're fun. It's kind of like drag racing. Right? Drag racing is fun. Oh, look, it's a Tesla against not a Tesla. But that doesn't tell you whether or not you can effectively get groceries and take the kids to soccer practice. The benchmarks go from plain text, which is literally saying hello world 7 million times a second, to the Fortune benchmark, which is a full e-commerce app with like putting stuff in a database and doing stuff in Express. And then you also have to think about the matrix of things that you would use. You'd have .NET on Linux talking to Postgres, or .NET on Windows talking to SQL Server, or this on that talking to Mongo, and all the different combinations. But it is show you that speed is not our problem. Yes?
You mentioned before the Venn diagrams of Xamarin and .NET Core kind of overlapping. Is one going to ever eat the other, or they're just going to live side by side?
The .NET standard is the thing you should worry about. If you're a .NET developer, if you're learning .NET, if you're thinking about .NET, you should learn the language syntax, C#7, C#8. You should know the surface area that is the most shared, .NET Standard 2.0 or above. And then lastly or thirdly, the stuff like platform-specific APIs that are only Windows or only Mac or only containers or only Xamarin. Xamarin supports .NET Standard fully. So if you should push everything you possibly can into a .NET Standard DLL, if code reuse is your goal, and everything platform-specific into loadable plugins. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Cool. Is that good? Something else that's fun that my team is working on. This is just getting started. If you want to try this out on your iPad or your Chromebook, you can go to try.net. Try.net. And this actually runs some Kubernetes containers in the background and allows you to write code and then hit run, and it will run it. And we've also lit up all of the docs. So if you go to docs.microsoft.com and click on .NET and go and do the Learn C# tutorial. This is all without downloading anything. You go in here and you say this. You can go and read your code and then try it out on the side. So you can learn how to do .NET in the browser. And then right now we're in the process of moving this to Blazor. So right now, this example, unless I think I may need to turn off my ad blocker. There it is. This one uses the back end to compile the .NET code. Soon this will use Blazor and do it all on the client side. So that'll be fun to be able to learn, like take a full class on how to use .NET and learn C# without having to download anything. I always joke about this, like the Go people will come and they'll run Vim or Emacs and they'll install Go and they'll teach the kids Go. And they'll go, okay, goodbye, kids. And the Microsoft guy's like, hey, kids, we're going to learn C#. First, we're going to download Visual Studio, and then it's going to be 2 gig ISO file. And then tomorrow, after your Windows update's completed, we're going to say hello world, right? So what I want people to be able to do is download .NET. You've seen that these are all very small things. You saw that we downloaded, we had like a full version of WPF, everything entirely in one folder for 100 megs. I can get the Docker containers down to between 30 and 70 megs, depending on what you want. The days of 2 gigs of .NET are kind of over. There's also .NET script. See this here? No executable matching command .NET script. Hanselman, .NET scripting. You should just put Hanselman in front of all of your Google searches. I'm going to install a global tool. Node people know about like in global tools. So I'm just going to say .NET tool install, .NET script. Okay, and now I'm going to say .NET script. Should take a second. Oh, did I have to put a semicolon? I don't know what's happening. Pissed off the beast. Let's lower our expectations, right? Oh, you know what? This might not be working. Remember how I said this is on .NET? It might not be working because of .NET 3.0? No, but my console.write line didn't. Okay. It wasn't warm. Anyway, you get the idea. That's a REPL, right? Read, evaluate, print loop. So trying to get all these things together and make it nice. So at that point then, oh, and by the way, for my Vim and my Emacs people, you can all go and use OmniSharp, which is great. It lets you do Atom and Emacs and Vim and all that kind of stuff and get IntelliSense and all the kind of good experience that you want to get. Cool. Any other questions? It's a pretty good time to be a .NET developer right now. The thing that I want people to do is that there's a lot of people who put their heads down and 5 years went by or 10 years went by and they might be feeling like their WinForms work or their whatever they were doing at big giant company was a waste. But it's not. It is absolutely not. I'm building all kinds of really cool stuff on Raspberry Pis and IoT. We even have a Raspberry Pi API now for .NET Core. Everything we do is open source. We talk about running Pis on Raspbian, running Pis on Windows 10 IoT Core. We just made the GPIO, the general purpose I/O stuff for blinking LEDs and hooking up stuff, all open source and available. Everything we do is open by default now, which is pretty cool.
Scott, what about NetDuino? Does it work there?
Interesting question. So we have a NetDuino, which is like Arduino.
Yeah.
Arduino.
Or, yeah, the NetDuino. I've heard good things about it. There's supposed to be some new one coming out or something?
There's a new one called Wilderness Labs.
Has anyone in the audience ever heard about the NetDuino new thing yet?
So,
Brian, do you know anything about it?
so you see how, so this is an interesting point, right? This is where things get interesting. Like in the past, you would ask Microsoft for something and then they would say no, and then we'd sneak it up on you later, and then by then it was too late. Now that everything's a standard, right, the .NET standard is a standard. That hello, what's up function that we just made can now run on a device like this, a connected things device. But there are microcontrollers, single, really, really low-powered, run for weeks on a battery type things. There are microprocessors, and there are, full computers that run, like when you run a Raspberry Pi, if you're using a Raspberry Pi to manage push a button, turn on a light, that's too much, right? That's an entire operating system plus Python, in order to push a button and turn on a light. So you don't want a microcomputer, you want like a microprocessor, you want something small, maybe something like this. Look at the size of this device.
Hold it up, Brian.
Have you got one here?
Yeah.
Me. So a tiny device like this, but the fact is it's .NET standard compliant, and it's that compliance that makes things easier, right? This is a Kickstarter. Can I see it? How big is it? Is it going to like shock me? Is it going to ruin it? Oh my God.
I don't think so.
Here, maybe, I don't want to shock you.
They're pretty robust, actually.
Well, I still don't want to shock myself. Look how small these are. Isn't that cool? Yeah. That runs .NET. So if you're a .NET programmer, C# programmer, you learn that stuff now, you can do this. Now here's the part that's interesting though. Do you think it runs .NET Core? Do you think it's big enough to run like a full runtime with like memory and all that kind of stuff? Right? Does it do AOT?
It will. It does in AOT today.
So AOT ahead of time. Remember, there's two kinds of run. It can do it just in time, or you can do it ahead of time.
You got AOT, JIT, and interp.
So you can take a bunch of .NET. Let's say I had some IL, like that IL that we loaded at the very beginning when we said, yeah, that's a
Will present in March, by the way.
He's going to present that in March. We'll do back to this Kickstarter. It's pretty cool stuff. So there's, as he said, there's just in time, meaning I compiled that C# into intermediate language, and the intermediate language was shuttled across the world, and then I compiled it natively just in time. That's one way to do it. There's doing it ahead of time, like it does on the iPhone or on Android, where it's like, I'm just going to chew it up now, because I have the processing power, and then I'll run it directly on the thing. And then there's interpreted, where it's like, well, I could actually look at that IL, and I could walk the AST, the abstract syntax tree, and do that. It's another really interesting product in this new world of Open.NET called Continuous Codes. It's a professional IDE for the iPad. C#. Yeah. So how could that be possible? The iPad doesn't allow runtimes. The compilation can't happen there. You don't want to do the compilation in the cloud because then you'd have to manage a cloud service. How could you do something like that? You'd interpret it. You'd do it interpret it. You bring the code in, you'd build the DOM, and you'd interpret it. But you don't have an interpreter lying around, right? You do have the Roslyn open source C# compiler that expresses a code DOM, and it's open source. You could fork that, and that's what the gentleman, Frank, that built this did. And he did it in such a way that when you're typing your code, watch on the right when he changes yellow to red, it updates instantly. Only possible in a world where this stuff is all open source, only being able to pull something like Wilderness Labs' new Meadow processors together would be possible in an open source world. So there's a lot of really fun stuff. I'm really jazzed about .NET right now. And I went there many, many years ago because I hitched my wagon to .NET. It's a very good time to be a .NET programmer. And you've got a lot of great choices, whether it be Python or Node or Go or Ruby or .NET. Everyone is encroaching upon a really awesome experience, and everyone's moving each other forward. So that's why I think that's my talk. Is that cool? Are we giving away stuff now?
We're going to do some giving away. Does anyone else want to acquire additional tickets for the big prizes? Because
Yeah.